This is Todd Lewis at Crestomere School. We have a Zoom chat here today, and this is in response to our Genius Hour that the junior high is undergoing. With our Genius Hour, students are optionally choosing a subject that's passionate to them or interesting to them, and they're spending an hour each day just practicing it, getting better at it, and hoping to become experts someday. Each student has been linked up with an expert so that they can kind of help mentor and provide advice and tips along the way. And we have a couple students at Crestomere School who are aspiring authors. They want to learn how to write, start books, and hopefully make a profession of it, which I think is just amazing. So Brooke and Taylor Stiles are here with us. Those are our writers and soon to hopefully be professional writers. And the expert who has offered his advice and insight is Minister Faust, which is just amazing because he is a professional bona fide writer who has a whole bunch of credits to his career, including the Coyote Kings novel, War and Mirror. Okay, he's written for video games. He's a poet. He's a screenwriter. He's a whole bunch of different stuff that would take way too long to list everything. So also, I got to add in there, he wrote on Mass Effect 2, which is one of my favorite video games. So it's just awesome. And I don't know if I can think of anyone better to provide some advice to our aspiring authors. Mr. Whitbread is also in on the call, which is awesome. So I suppose I should throw this in there too. I met Mr. Faust when I was at university learning how to become a teacher. I was in an English class, and I was just really struggling with a couple papers, and he helped me during that time. And I don't know if I could have written them without his help. So I know from personal experience, he's going to be a huge help to Brooke and Taylor. Cool. So we actually have a list of questions that we're going to ask Mr. Faust, and then he will provide his answers, and then we'll see how things are going. We might bombard him with a whole bunch more questions. So
right. Okay.
Away we go. So Brooke and Taylor, take it away.
Hi, I'm Brooke.
Hi, I'm Taylor.
Hi, Taylor.
All right, so the first question that I have for you are, what are some strategies for engaging your readers?
Oh, okay. Now, do you mean for fiction?
Yes.
Well, the most obvious thing is what appeals to you when you read a book. So if you are wanting to write a certain type of book, you could really, knock yourself over the head trying to appeal to all readers. And I got to tell you, don't do that. If you take one of the most successful book series of, the last 100 years, which would be the Harry Potter series, and you look at how many people have been alive during since the books came out in the last 25 years or so. So, 8 billion people, because some of those people have died, so we've only got 7.5 billion. Almost none of those people have read any Harry Potter. So what it means is that the most successful books of all time have been enjoyed by a very small sliver of people. So if J.K. Rowling threw up her hands and said, well, I'll never have universal appeal, she would have wasted a great opportunity to satisfy an awful lot of people. So the most important thing is figure out what you want to read in a book, and then you just do more of that.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay.
What does writing mean to you, and why do you do it?
Well, I think a lot of us who are readers, lifelong readers, had the experience of, we could enjoy family, friends. Some people, of course, grow up into conditions where maybe they don't fit in with their families, or they live in a town or a city or a neighborhood where maybe people don't treat them so nicely. But other people have wonderful lives. They're very happy. But what's common to all of them is that books give them connections they never had otherwise. So when I was a little kid, literally sitting on my mom's lap, and my mom was reading to me the novel Red Planet by Robert Heinlein, what I got right away, and I was probably 4 or 5, was this experience of being on another planet, in this case Mars. And the book, it's a YA novel. It's a book about some boarding school kids who have to leave their settlement and then travel to a boarding school that is run by an evil principal. And then they decide to escape. And in the process, they end up meeting Martians and discovering these wonderful, magnificent mysteries of ancient Mars. And one of the things that happens to them is that, in this book written in the 1940s, Mars has these big plants that are called cabbages. And the boys they've missed their train, so their transport, they're gonna freeze to death. So they figure, you know what, let's just kind of like cowboys would apparently in the worst weather, they would cut open their dying or their dead horse, and then they'd go inside like it's a sleeping bag. Those of you who've watched The Empire Strikes Back saw Luke do this with his tauntaun. Well, there's these Martian cabbages, they unfold to catch the sun rays during the day, and then they close up at night looking like a cabbage. So the two boys decide to go inside, and they keep their flashlight on so that they don't feel terrified of the darkness. And then they discover, that they're able to breathe, for one thing, because by giving it light, it continues to feed them oxygen. Otherwise, it would have closed entirely, and they would have been crushed to death, and they would have suffocated as well. What I got out of that when I was a little kid was a fascination for science, for plant science, for traveling to other worlds of the space sciences, the idea that young people could use their ingenuity and sometimes luck, and that they could strike out on their own without they could escape unjust authority, and they could make contact with dazzling, remarkable people, in this case aliens, Martians of a very different culture. All of those things taught me that if people around me didn't understand my fascinations, well, this book did, and the writer did, and every other person who read that book also shared those fascinations. And so books give everybody the chance to realize I'm not alone. Other people think and feel the way that I do. And so for me as a writer, I want to make sure that I can give that experience to a whole bunch of readers. It won't be billions, it won't be millions, but for every person who picks up that work and enjoys it, they'll say, there's more people like me. And like me can mean anything. It doesn't mean our race, gender, sexual orientation, our religion, our body composition. It could just mean I'm a person who loves reading about pancakes. That's all it's got to mean.
Cool.
How old were you when you knew that you wanted to write professionally?
Well, thanks for that question. I was 10. So, wow, well, good for you. It's a good age. It's a great age. You got your first decade done. Now it's just like, wow, now I'm just going to build on all that I just learned. So, I had wanted to be an astronomer up until that point because of science fiction novels. But then I started reading a lot of comics, and I was already reading a lot of novels, and I love drawing. And so at first I fell in love with the idea of being a comic book artist, which makes you a storyteller, but you're a collaborator. You're not coming up with the stories yourself. You're working with a writer. But I think by the end of my 10th year, I started to realize that I wanted to write comics as well, so I'd have control over the stories, because a lot of my favorite comic creators, people like Frank Miller and Jim Starlin, that's what they were doing. So I guess within a few years after that, some of my friends made it into the comic book field, and I was certainly still wanting to be a writer artist. But the ones who made it in, they weren't making a lot of money. Their lives were really unpleasant. Getting into the world of comics is a great way to be overworked and broke. So being a professional writer of, let's say, books, the chances are you are not going to earn a lot of money. So if you're going to do it, you should do it for the love of it, the way that people who are painters and musicians, for the most part, do it because they love it. And so when you do make some money, you celebrate. Yes! There's a couple of teachers on the line. I was a teacher for 10 years, and teaching is a great job. You work with outstanding young people. You love the work. And something that a lot of people in Canada don't realize is that teachers in Canada, thank heaven, because of in Alberta, an outstanding union, the Alberta Teachers Association, we make a great living, great benefits. It's a terrific career I would recommend to anybody. But one of the things about being able to depend on your money is that when you get it, you don't celebrate it anymore. I don't know about, Todd and Rory on the line, but, we didn't even get checks, right? You don't get a check. It's just direct deposit into your account. You don't go, yes, thousands of dollars. No, you got your money and you're not thinking of that. You're just thinking, oh, I got all these papers tomorrow, or, oh, I got these great kids to see today. But, the funny thing is, and I have talked, one of the most successful writers in the country is named Robert J. Sawyer. He's a friend of mine. He's a science fiction writer. He's enormously successful. He's also written television based on one of his own novels called Flash Forward. And we've both been at events where we've been selling our own books. If you go to conventions, you'll be there. You're signing autographs sometimes, and you just sell books. Even though Rob's rich, he still enjoys that experience of a few $100s of cash in his hand from selling books. So that's haven't heard many writers talk about that, but I'll tell you that it's actually quite satisfying to actually even earn a small amount of money from doing something that you love. It doesn't have to pay all your bills, but when other people tell you, I enjoy your work so much, I'll actually give you my money, that lets you, whereas, our moms and dads, what are they going to say? Oh, that's a nice story, dear. Oh, what did you like about it? Oh, it was good. But when somebody sends you an email and just says, hey, thank you so much, that story meant a lot to me. It reminded me of when I got my baby brother, or when my dog died, or when my parents and me, we moved to another city, or I would love to have adventures. All those things are great experiences. So I know that was a long, rambly answer, but it's part of being a writer is sometimes being rambly.
Awesome. Next question. Yeah.
Looking back, what is one thing you wish you knew when you first started writing?
What a great question. I think that one of the things that I wish I had known is that there are patterns to creating plots, and if you can learn those patterns, you can save yourself an awful lot of time and then focus on the things that are outside of the pattern. So let me explain. I love to eat, I love to cook, I love to eat, grow food, get groceries, all that. If I wanted to go to a grocery store and they didn't have the food arranged in sections, like meat and milk and vegetables and fruit and butter and all that stuff, then finding my ingredients would take forever. I'd waste a ton of time just searching. But fortunately, they've divided it by sections so I can find what I want. If I build a model kit, all the pieces have been, separated, and I know, well, you got to glue the fuselage to the wings, to the propeller, whatever. When you're writing a plot, it's really, really helpful to know that there are specific things that must go in the beginning and that the characters have to react to that force them to grow and then change their mind, and then change their mind again, and then ultimately solve their problems or, go down in flames trying. And there's an outstanding book I recommend to all writers, whether they are professionals for decades or whether they are 10-year-olds who have decided, hey, I am going to change the world with my books. It's a terrific book you can get very inexpensively, probably from your library. And if your school library doesn't have it, then I encourage you to get your teachers and your librarian to get it. And the book is called Save the Cat.
Save the Cat.
And Save the Cat is the structure of stories. And it's written by a screenwriter, the late Blake Snyder. And Blake Snyder did not have a big film career. He's most famous for writing Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. However, you don't have to be great at the thing to be great and even brilliant at understanding the thing. So Albert Einstein never built a nuclear reactor or flew back in time, but his theories helped us to understand the science and the potential engineering behind those things and many more. Well, Blake Snyder helped us to understand the ways that movie scripts should work in order to appeal to lots of people. So if you can understand that structure, what you won't do is write 200 pages of a book that's going nowhere, of fun characters who sit around and trade jokes, but don't do anything interesting. And it's pretty heart destroying to write hundreds of pages of work and realize, oh my gosh, no one will care. Whereas if you know from the beginning, if I do this by page 5, people will keep reading. If I do this by page 25, people will keep reading, etc. So structure, that is one of the most important things. Now, it all matters. So I'd say learn some psychology. Learn psychology because your characters will be way better. Learn to be funny. Your writing will be more enjoyable. Write as many things as you can. So do some journalism, write poetry, join a sketch comedy group, make sure that you do some acting. All of these things will make you a better writer.
Cool.
Our story is called Something Strange.
Good for you. That's great. What's it about?
A shark. Everything.
That's terrific.
Okay.
Is it almost done?
No, we actually just started it. So, yeah.
Excellent.
One thing to an actual computer.
All right.
Can I, Brooke,
Good for you.
can I ask a quick question just to kind of follow up on that?
Yeah.
So, so Brooke and Taylor, they're one of their goals, because in our Genius Hour, each person has a goal they're working towards. And ladies, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but one of your goals is to not only write, but be original, have original ideas. Is that right, ladies?
Yes.
So how do you balance having structure and certain beats you have to hit within a story and yet still maintain originality? Because if you just have a template, basically, do you fall into a trap of just copying other stories, or can you still be original?
I love that question. Thank you so much for that. And the question of originality is something that you're going to encounter from everybody who, from many, many people. And especially if you get hired to write, like for instance, if you write in a video game company. So I'll put it to you like this. Probably everybody who's watching this video loves ice cream. And it can be really exciting to find a wonderful new flavor. But I'm betting that nobody has eaten fish ice cream made with rocks and razor blades. Now, I think we can all agree that's very original. And it's theoretically possible it could be good. I can't imagine how, but let's just imagine somehow that's good. But the chances of you taking out $3 from your wallet and handing that over to somebody for fish, brick, and razor blade ice cream is almost zero. So here's the great myth of originality. People think that they want things to be original. And you as a creator might want to be really original. The difficulty is in selling it to enough people to be able to make a living or even make a sale for a single short story and have an editor call you back and say, hey, what else you got? So here's the little thing that I learned writing, because I wrote for more than one video game company, and I won't say which company I experienced this in. I'll just say it's something that I learned. When somebody tells you, we want this to be really original, fresh, dynamic, new, like nothing seen before, what they actually mean is, we want it to be exactly like everything we've ever seen before, except for one little tiny gimmick. Okay? So that's what they want. Now, your job is to get some wiggle room. So if they want it to be 1% original and 99% a copy, then your job is to try to squeeze 10 to 25% to make that original. And if you can do that, then audiences will recognize it and they'll say, we love it. Now, I don't want to insult any Harry Potter fans, but if you were already reading a lot of books before Harry Potter came out, fantasy, for instance, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, comic books such as the X-Men, which takes place at Charles Xavier's Academy, then you'd say, oh, I recognize this. This is from, this school of people with special powers. That's from the X-Men. Most of the mythology is, really based in J.R.R. Tolkien's work, which in itself was drawn from a variety of European cultures. So, copying is part of the business. There's no getting around it. And if you make your work totally original, I'm sorry to say that you're going to have a very tough time selling it to enough people. So don't worry about it. The last thing I'll say on this is that, and I wish I could remember who said it, but something like originality is obscure plagiarism.
I like that, so you don't get caught.
Yeah.
Cool.
X-Men's good movie.
Okay. Our next question is, when beginning a story, how do you actually get started? Do you brainstorm? Do you make a concept map? Or what do you use to get started?
Great question. And this, that of course does relate to structure as in the book Save the Cat. So what usually happens for me is I get some kind of neat idea. It's a what if, and all stories start off with a what if. And although some people refer to science fiction and fantasy as speculative fiction, I would say that expression doesn't make any sense because all fiction is speculative. You say, well, what if this guy did that? What if this gal did that? That's what speculation is. And if you're not speculating, then it's real life. So then it's not fiction. So at any rate, I start off with some kind of really what if. So with my first book, The Coyote Kings of the Space Age Pastoral Cat, my big what if question was, well, what if a couple of, I wrote it when I was about 25. What if a couple of Generation X guys like the kind that I knew who loved science fiction and fantasy and role-playing games and cosplay and all that kind of stuff, what if they encountered somebody who actually knew magic? So one thing is that they would their minds would be blown constantly, because I didn't like seeing stories where amazing things would happen and people took it very casually. Like, oh, wow, look at that, there's a spaceship. Let's go investigate. It's like, what? No, if you saw a spaceship that crashed, even if you spent your life wondering about spaceships, you would be terrified. For one thing, if you knew about science, you'd say, well, it could be radioactive. We could walk down there and have terminal cancer. So, let people actually react to things using, reality. So that's another what if. And then all those things, because they create problems for the characters, that's what stories need, is people encounter things that cause them problems, and then they try to solve those problems. If your characters don't have problems, you don't have a story. So as I use the story structure from things such as Save the Cat, or what's often called the hero's journey, and if you're interested in learning more writing, then all you have to do is Google the expression writing hero's journey, and you'll find a variety of versions of that. And there's lots of other structures and schemas that are available. But the bottom line is, you start to slot things that interest you. So, for me, I know, well, I want maybe this story to deal with two guys being really good friends who are there thick and thin. So then I start to think, well, what are some great examples of people really supporting each other through tough times? Well, there's all kinds of stuff. You can have a breakup and you got to support your friend. You could break your leg and your friend's got to put a cast on you. You could, get lost in the woods, or you could have to help your parents, they're in their 70 and they're getting divorced, whatever. So all of those things, you start to write a list, and that's where you mentioned brainstorm. You write a list of interesting ways to show people supporting each other. And then you think, well, which ones of these do I like? You circle the ones that you love, and I'm going to use those. And then, okay, how do friends sometimes get mad at each other? What happens? And then you jot down things like that. Well, he ate all my ice cream sandwiches. I paid for those. You write that down. He stole my girlfriend. That's a much more important one. So you write all those things down, and then you write down stuff like, well, how are they going to solve those problems? And so then, as you have this, you got your Save the Cat general story, and you've got your characters, and you've got their problems and their opportunities, and then I'm making this storyline of all these things that could happen, and then some of these things that sounded like great ideas at the beginning, as I start writing, I think, well, it's boring. I thought that would be exciting, and it turns out it's not. And then some minor thing, I'm writing on the sequel to Coyote Kings right now, and I wrote in a very minor character who was the wife of the villain. And then I discovered that the wife of the villain was more interesting than the villain. And so I actually had no notes on her at all, because I wasn't even intending for her to show up. So then that was very exciting, because it gave me new things to create. So the bottom line is, you have some structure. It's kind of like you're taking a road trip. Your family says, let's drive to the North Pole. And, that sounds like a great idea, even though it's winter. So, let's jump in the car and go to the North Pole. So you have a map, you know where to get gas, and you know where to get groceries and restaurants. But along the way, there's stuff you forgot and you didn't know that you were going to experience. So, there are polar bears, there are bandits, there's way too much snow. And so then that's what happens, is that for me as a writer, along the way, always the middle, I get bogged down because there's a bunch of things I didn't solve before the story started. And the end is so far away. It's like, you're stuck in northern Alberta and you've got your binoculars out and you're trying to see the North Pole. And it's like, we can't see it. No, we're too far away. Oh, should we go home? We're too far. No, we got to keep going. But then, by the time you finally see that end point, it's so exciting. And so the end is just the last third of a book for me is just like pure adrenaline. I'm just writing. I could be writing till 3 a.m. So there we go.
Cool.
Cool.
Last question. Would you say it or?
You can say it. Okay. When should we include dialogue in stories, and what purposes do dialogue serve?
My advice would be to get your characters talking immediately. One of the things that I encountered, I did not grow up reading mystery novels. I didn't start reading mystery novels until I was in my 40s. And one of my favorite writers, or 30s, so one of my favorite writers is a guy named Walter Mosley. I just happen to have one of his books right here. This is Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned. And just by coincidence, I happen to have the audiobook next to it. So at any rate, I'm a Walter Mosley nerd, I guess. So at any rate, one thing I had never encountered in fiction before is that he'll just start books with somebody talking. You don't even know who's talking. It'll just say like, "What are you doing there, kid?" And it's like, whoa, that's so immediate. It's like somebody, it's like you're walking through a bookstore, you don't know what to buy, and one book just reaches up and just, "Hey, buy me." It's like, whoa. So you're gonna pay attention. Whereas I was, a lot of older books, the books that I grew up with, man, they can have like 2-3 pages of, for me, very lengthy, detailed, and boring description of, the house was set on the hill, and the trees were spindly, and come on, like, I cannot even make sense out of 3 pages of physical description of it. The grass was cracked and the ants were, like, no, like, just show me the people talking. The rest will start to make sense based on how they treat each other. And so that's when I would suggest have your characters talk right away. And when they talk, they should talk like the people you know, meaning that even if you couldn't hear your friend's voice, you just heard her words, like the words were transcribed, you'd go, "Oh, I know who that is. She always says that. She uses this word. She uses that expression. She, whatever, right? She makes that kind of jokes." Your characters should be the same. They should sound like completely individual people, so that if you switch the dialogue from one character to another, your readers would say, no, she doesn't talk like that. She talks like that. If you do that, your characters will come alive and people will always love them and cherish them. And in fact, I don't know if I don't read fan fiction, but I know that one of the reasons that fan fiction works, I should say, I'm speculating, is because people are writing about characters they've seen in television and movies, and the actors and the writers have created these completely individual people that you can't confuse one for another. And so, Marvel movies, all those characters, the Captain America does not sound like Iron Man. They sound like completely different people. And, Black Widow does not sound like Hawkeye. And that's the way it should be.
Cool.
Awesome.
That was a lot of questions, so.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So it's kind of back to structure of writing, and it's a question about your work on video games. So the brainstorming and just the mapping things out, how does that differ between a regular novel or paper format versus a video game, especially one like Mass Effect, where you have branching different outcomes that you make one choice and that affects 10 other choices, and then there's 10 different outcomes or paths. So how do you organize that? How do you keep everything straight?
Well, on a big video game like Mass Effect, which cost, I can't remember what the budget was, but Mass Effect 2 was probably in the $50 million range, something like that. And there's a whole team worth of writers. And then, there's a head writer who's also responsible for speaking to I can't remember all the titles, but like lead designer and executive producer, all that. There's a lot of work. And so there's kind of a main storyline. We kind of want this major thing to happen. And then you have these side missions. But here's the big thing I'm going to kind of, I'm sure that a lot of people know this already, but the video games that offer you all these choices you can make, it's an illusion. So you actually have what looks like a lot of choice, but really the writers, there's not an infinite number of things that the writers can write, and also that the voice actors can be brought into voice. So that's why sometimes on some scenes that are less successful, you may have had that experience where, I don't know, you started to say things to one of these characters who could talk, and you've chosen kind of jerk choices, so the character's getting angry. I don't want to help you with that at all. Why don't you go back to your spaceship? And then you choose to leave, and then there's an abrupt switch where the character says, all right, then goodbye.
Yeah.
You know, the character's not mad anymore, and that's because there were only a few possibilities that were written and were recorded.
Mm-hmm.
So the main thing is, if you decided to write, you know, it's unfortunate that the choose your own adventure concept, that many adults assumed that it was a format suitable only for very young kids, because there's no reason why choose your own adventure format, which the fancy intellectual term for that is ergodic writing. I guess like ergo is in therefore. And you know, if you think of anybody who's, I mean, at any stage of life, but let's take adults who may have been engaged or married or divorced, whatever. Every phase of that, of your life has had some major decision point. And if you'd chosen this one, your life would turn out totally differently. Totally. You move to this city and you don't meet the person who becomes your wife or the child that you're going to adopt or whatever, right? Well, that's a great thing for adult writers writing for adults to explore. There's no reason why a novel couldn't take that format of like, what does this decision lead to? That could be outstanding. I think eventually a generation of people who grew up playing video games, these kind of high fidelity video games, so primarily millennials, but some Generation Xers who really love these, and then the younger generation as well, they are going to write literary novels that feature branching stories, and you'll read all the branches, and I think people would love them. It's really exciting to see, this line, and not for a cheap thing like, oh, well, it turns out you should have studied medicine like your mother told you. I don't mean like that. I just mean you could do amazing things. But the big thing is, I think the easiest way is choose kind of, go along, the character has a choice, and then you say, well, let's take that in these two directions. And then maybe you get four. You can't write more than that. Like, you just don't have time to write that. I know that's kind of a wobbly answer to your question, but in video games, basically, it's the illusion of choice. You really don't. The things have to branch and then quickly come back. Otherwise, you take something like Mass Effect, the main character, Shepard, could just say, you know what, I think all this fighting in space stuff is too much. I want to become an orthodontist. Like, you don't have that choice in the game. And you don't have any choice anywhere near that level of freedom.
Right. So that's your choices, quote unquote choices. Is that a limitation due to technology or timing? Because obviously they can't record, thousands and thousands of lines of dialogue, or is that a limitation just in they don't want to make that broad of a narrative in terms of different paths to take, because it'd just be too complicated?
I think it's all of that, and you're just getting back to how many lines of dialogue. Believe it or not, they actually do record thousands. And in fact, it might be in the 10,000, or I'm sure my friends on the inside would laugh at me for not knowing the number, but it's astonishingly a high number of lines. And so, and that's why these games cost. I mean, some of the other games now are $125 million, that kind of thing. So if you recorded substantially more, and also then, like, how do you come up with a sequel? Because if you want to have, Mass Effect 2 and 3, and then, Andromeda and these other things with some kind of continuity, if the characters have gone down radically different paths, then, like, a war is going to have to be resolved one way for you to launch the next game. So in the future, eventually it will become possible for the software to create novel responses from characters, that brand new things that nobody wrote down, with a computer generated voice that sounds like because somebody's voice will be scanned,
right? And
we already have these awful deep fakes where people's faces have been, real people have been grafted onto, potentially awful situations. And so all that stuff will exist in games. So one day it will be possible that, you could have like, I hope this will never happen to both of you as teachers on the line, but, like you could have been scanned in, and a year's worth of your teaching could have been scanned, and then you die in a car accident, and your students never know. They just bring in the digital you. Especially online, that'd be simple. But one day, even with actual robots and androids, I mean, that's a long way in the future.
That could be cool, though.
In terms of
I like to think of myself. Sorry, I like to think of myself as a hologram. I love that. Pacing around, walking through desks. That could be cool.
Yes, exactly. So those are technical limitations, and one day they will be surpassed. And it's just a question of how long. But in terms of like a video screen, like a Zoom interaction like this, it's not going to be long. In fact, probably somebody already has a deep fake avatar of him or herself, and then it's just how much do you scale it?
Cool. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that was all the condensed questions we had for you. Do you have time? If we have any more questions, do you have time?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Cool. Mr. Whitbread, ladies, do you have any questions?
Is there any like special tips that you haven't said yet that you could have for us for like a short type of story?
Yeah, short stories. Well, yes. With the short story, there's a word that probably, and I was an English teacher, but sometimes I like to talk in a way that would have enraged my English teachers or some of my colleagues. All stories have gimmicks. And you probably, at your grade level, I don't think you would have studied any Shakespeare yet, but Shakespeare's full of gimmicks. The way that the characters talk to each other in a special, completely artificial way of speaking called iambic pentameter, many audiences have loved it for a long time, for centuries. I myself enjoy it, but it's a gimmick. All of his plays had gimmicks, ghosts and sword fights and affairs. They're gimmicks. The only question is, are you going to use one of those gimmicks in a way that's going to satisfy your audience? Short stories are short. It's built right into the name. So choose one major gimmick for any story that you're going to do, and your story will stand out. Even if you're going to have a story that takes place in a very naturalistic world where there's no magic and there's no science fictional ideas. But if the gimmick is, for instance, your dog, I don't know, whatever, gets soaked in maple syrup and runs out the door, that's going to lead to all kinds of hijinks. That's a gimmick for a story. And some people, if I said to them like, oh, well, this story is about the divorce of, a young couple under the pandemic. And I say, well, that's your gimmick. And they say, that's not a gimmick. That's an important social issue reflecting the crisis of our time. That's true. It's a gimmick that does that, okay? So a gimmick is an attention-getting trick, and that's what artists use. And if your story has no gimmicks, that's why no one's reading it. So choose one gimmick, no more than 3 for a short story, because you just don't have time to do justice to them.
Cool. I have a question about publishing. How long does it usually take, and how much does it cost?
Okay. So we want to differentiate between publishing and printing. So you as a writer trying to sell your stories should never spend 1 penny to have your story published. And if anybody says to you, oh, just give me this amount of money and we'll publish your story, they're not publishing it, they're printing it. Now you may want someone to print your work, but you shouldn't go through somebody who's offering to do that stuff for you, because those people 99% of the time are rip-off artists. If you want to be an independent writer, which is perfectly legitimate, and some of us are so-called hybrid writers, which means we publish some of our stuff ourselves, and we also, some of our stuff is published by publishing companies. Like my first books were published by Random House under the Del Rey imprint. But what you want is, if you're going to be an independent, you're going to pick up a lot of skills so that you can learn how to lay out your work. You need to have somebody else proofread it, because nobody is really good at proofreading their own stuff. That's one thing that's worth paying for. But you're going to learn layout. If you're an artist, you may learn some cover design. You may learn a lot of stuff about advertising. These are all skills that you can use in other careers. So it's really a good idea, especially for you as young writers. Why not learn this now? When I was the writer in residence at the University of Alberta, one of the professors approached me and said he'd like to have his students learn more about editing. So could I work with them to learn about editing? And it was, I think what he had in mind was sort of like proofreading, but maybe how to change story structure. I said, why do that? Why not have them create a book and sell it? So he was quite excited by the prospect. So what that meant was that the students, the 3 or 4 young women who were, or 5 women who were involved as the editors, they would get their classmates to submit poems, short stories, whatever they wanted. They would work as editors to choose them, work with the writers, the pieces, and work with the writers to refine their content. And then I would show them, like, I just got them started. I didn't teach them all these things, but I said, you know, use this for layout and use this. We're going to actually get these books printed through CreateSpace, which in the meantime Amazon has purchased. And it's very inexpensive. If you want only one book printed, you can do that. Traditionally, people would go and they would get 500 or 1,000 books printed. And usually what happened is those books would all stay in their basement. It's very difficult to sell books. But if you can print as few as 10 at a time or 50 at a time, then you can actually, you don't have to worry about storing them and you can sell them. Now, if what you want to do is you want to have other people publish your work, then I strongly recommend that you ask your school library to get a subscription to the magazine Writer's Digest. Not Reader's Digest, Writer's Digest. Your public library may already have it. You can find it online as well. It's an outstanding magazine full of great things to learn about the craft of writing, so how to be better at what you do, but the business of writing. So which magazines are publishing short stories of the type that you're writing? If you want to write books, what are the publishers that you should approach? How should you approach them? Advice on, should I deal with an agent? All that stuff matters so much. I have a podcast which is available. You can get it on Spotify, and there's 190 episodes up. And I think about maybe 70 or so are writers talking about how to write. So I don't bring writers on the show to talk about their story. Oh, it was my vampire werewolf lawyer story. No, they don't talk about what they wrote. They talk about how they write and how they make money. And there's no reason why at age 10, you shouldn't be learning these things. In fact, I would say 10 is the perfect time to learn them because you'll be learning the business and the writing together. Now, that's important because you'll meet writers who are 40 and 50 and older who have all kinds of fantasies and illusions about how, if I just finish my book, I'll have millions. It's like, sure, buddy. Sure, buddy. Okay. But if you can earn a few $100s when you're 10 from writing short stories for the next 2 or 3 years, that's pretty exciting. And if by the time you're in your 20s, it's a few $1,000s, that's pretty exciting. And it can grow from there. So absolutely you can do it. And although I'm addressing that to you and you may be 10, if you're 50 and you're just getting started writing now, then it's like that person's younger than you as a writer. Because you're 10, you've been doing, how long have you been writing?
I've been writing since I was 6.
Okay, and how about you?
Same.
Okay, so
Writing small little things for classes.
right. So there's that number of years that you've been doing this. But somebody who starts at age 50 and they've only been doing it for 1 year, you have way more experience than they do. But the point is everybody can learn. And so, Writer's Digest is a great place to learn.
Cool. Thank you.
Your teacup is pretty.
Thank you. It is beautiful. I got it at Superstore, an end of season sale. It was about $4, and I love a bargain. But I love tea even more.
She's the best.
Yeah.
Cool. So that opens me up to my tea-related questions. I'm kidding. Cool. Any more questions, guys?
I think that's all I have.
Okay, I've got a question if you don't mind, Malcolm.
Yeah, please.
Really enjoying this, so thank you so much for doing this. If some writers out there have gone on to post-secondary education and developed their writing when they were there, some writers have just kept on writing and become successful that way. To somebody who is in high school, what advice would you give them on the importance of a post-secondary education or not, depending on the education?
Troy, thanks for that question, and it is very important. Now, I really, as a teacher, I mean, even if you've been a teacher, even if you're not working for a school board anymore, you're always going to be a teacher. So I prize education. It's absolutely valuable. One of the things that's become quite clear through this terrible COVID pandemic is that the people who've been disproportionately harmed have been the overwhelming majority of our society, that 80% of people who are blue collar and pink collar workers. And they don't have the benefits that we have to be able to work at home and work through a computer. They have to still go in to drive the vehicle, wash the counters, all that other kind of stuff. But we need to build a more just society so that they have more options. But in the meantime, you still want to make sure that you have the best future that you can get. And if you don't go to university, the chances of you being able to have that freedom and flexibility, as well as it's been proven, longer lifestyle, longer life, greater health, all that kind of stuff, you want to maximize your chances for a good life. Now, you do not need to get an English degree or a comparative literature degree. So for the younger folks listening and watching, comparative literature, you'd be reading not just English, but stuff that's written from other languages, or at least in translation. So you don't need a degree in those things to become a writer. Most science fiction writers, I have a lot of writer friends. And in fact, I think I'm one of the only ones who has an English degree, and certainly one of the very few who went on to be a teacher. So that's certainly not necessary. But what you should do is you should absolutely be a reader. And there isn't a hockey player alive who, joined the NHL and said that, I never watched hockey, never played it, no time for it. I just want to play in the NHL. I'm not interested in other stuff. No, they were passionate their whole life. They constantly played hockey, and when they weren't playing hockey, they were watching hockey, and when they weren't watching hockey, they were talking about hockey, and when they were asleep, they were dreaming about hockey. So I have encountered, and all of my writer friends have similar stories, people who don't read books, but they want to write books. And that's a stunning level of arrogance. I just can't even imagine why. If you're not willing to spend the time to read a book, why do you think other people would be? You're not going to understand them. So one of the things about taking a degree is that you get to spend a ton of time talking about stories. And that can be wonderful. It's a great way to learn about what makes books tick. Now, that being said, you could also, in my English degree, in 4 years, I had some wonderful professors. The word fun didn't come up once. And while that might seem like a strange comment to make, the reason I'm saying it is that we read because we're seeking fun. Now, some people think the word fun is frivolous, like, no, I'm reading about the great conflicts of human society and the mind, and I wish to be, raised as a person. No, look, okay, that's fun. For the person who just said that, that is fun. Reading about history and understanding psychological processes is fun for that person. So the fun is what makes people keep turning the pages. And if there's no fun in your work, it's the difference between a recipe and the food. So we all want to eat food, and if you went to a Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner and your parents said, dinner, and they brought out some recipes, you'd be crushed. So we all want the experience of the food. And so if you are reading other people's stories in an English class or other ways, where people are not just talking about these awesome, amazing things about serious topics in science and history and all that, but they're talking, why does this story make us want to keep reading? Then you learn those techniques, and those techniques matter. And that's the difference between, again, the person who just watches hockey and the person who gets into the NHL, because they learn the techniques and they practice them, they apply them. And every writer whose work you love has written tons of stuff you'll never see, because that writer said, oh no, this is awful. I'm not sending this to anybody, and it's certainly not getting published. But if they hadn't written that, they never would have gotten good enough to write the stuff that you love.
Awesome. Thank you. ladies.
And by the way, and that's what you should get out of a good university experience. So I just want to make sure that that's clear why post-secondary matters. But if you can't afford to go to university, you can certainly join creative writing classes, and you can learn a lot of this stuff from other people's, some of their books. But the most important thing is to work with other writers and writers in residence. Many library systems and universities and colleges have them. So do all of those things. University doesn't make you. Going to university is no proof that you're some kind of better person. But if you use the experience right, you can become a better person. Just like if you use the experience of your job or your club or your family, you can become a better person if you choose to be.
Cool. I think that's a really good point, because writing can often be like a solitary thing, and if you compare it to other passions, so like football or sports in general, you go to your team, you're surrounded by your teammates who are all passionate about what you're doing, and you feed off each other, and your passion makes his passion stronger and vice versa. Whereas if you're a writer and you're just all by your lonesome, you can be passionate, but now you're not having someone else, fill your bucket or make you even more passionate. So going to university, that was my experience, because you're just surrounded by like-minded individuals who are, in nursing or engineers or whatever, but they're passionate about it. They're excited about it. And it just in turn makes you more passionate and excited about whatever your thing is. And
it's totally true. If an owl with an invitation didn't show up at Harry Potter's house, he'd still be living underneath the stairs. He needed to go to a place where other people had the same love of magic. And magic's our metaphor for all the things that make us full of energy and full of life. So it doesn't, and just like going to Hogwarts doesn't mean that you're going to have nothing but joy. He experiences a lot of tragedy along the way. By the way, also caused by the most irresponsible teachers and principals in the history of literature. All of them should have been sued and fired. But that aside, being surrounded by people, as you say, who are passionate is going to intensify your passion. And one other thing, it's the flip side of this, it's kind of a downer to know, but you may also discover that you don't have that passion. And that is important, because that is a great thing you just learned. You learned to switch to something else. Because some people go into something because they think they're going to love it, and they devote a lot of their energy and their money and their time, and it's not for them. It doesn't mean they're not good enough or smart enough or whatever. They're just not into it. There are people who, they go to medical school because that's what their parents wanted them to do, and they discover that, oh, you know what? Sight of blood makes them pass out. Wrong career,
Awesome. Any more questions?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good. Nice to meet you both.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Awesome.
This was a lot of fun.
Well, great, and good luck with your writing. I'm looking forward. Hopefully your teacher will send me that shark story when it's done. And keep writing, because, if you're loving it, somebody else will love it. And you just keep on doing it. And it does not, I know famous writers all writers are going to struggle throughout their career, but they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it because it brings them joy. Make sure it keeps bringing you joy, and you're going to have a great life.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So on behalf of our junior high and in our school, Crestomere School, thank you so much for giving us your time and imparting wisdom and advice from your career. I know I'm excited. I think I'm going to switch careers and be a writer now. I'm just excited about it. So thank you so much. Hopefully we can do it again in the future.
Absolutely. Well, I love it. Thank you for asking me. And I had a blast. And, as one teacher talking with the teachers, I always enjoy spending time with teachers. And of course, as a teacher, I enjoy spending time with young people, and especially who are passionate about the same things that I am. So good on all of you. Keep it up, and we'll get through this COVID together.
Awesome. Thanks again, Mr. Faust.
Okay,
Thank
you take
you.
care.
I
Thanks.
appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Lewis, for setting this up.
Oh, you betcha. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.